If my business is down, then I'm down. If my business is up, then I'm up. I'm successful. I'm a failure. I'm success. It's just exhausting. And I think a lot of people overwork because they're still chasing that carrot of self-acceptance, acknowledgement, love from early in life through their business. And that is what causes a lot of stress. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Soul Sessions with Creative Mind. I'm Deborah Burnt Maldonado. I'm here with Dr. Rob Maldonado.
Nice to be here.
And we are so excited to continue our series on leadership. And the topic of today is the question, do leaders need a strong ego? We talk a lot about in the spiritual community about letting go of the ego, not being led by the ego. So we're going to turn this on the side a little bit and talk about what the ego is and why leaders actually may need a strong ego and how they can work with it. But before we begin and dive in, I'd love to invite you to join us to subscribe to our channel. If you're watching us on YouTube, just click here, the button in the corner. And if you are listening to us on Spotify, iTunes, or any of those wonderful podcast services, don't forget to subscribe so you can hear the whole leadership series and more.
All right.
Okay, so Rob, let's start with what is the ego? Like there's a lot of misunderstanding. Some people think a big ego is like egotistical.
You're right.
So from psychological terms, what does that mean?
Yeah. So in pop psychology, people talk about somebody has a big ego. They're saying that person is boisterous, very self-assured perhaps, or very grandiose, right? They have a big personality, but that's not really the psychological understanding of what an ego is. So we go back to Freud. Freud thought of the ego as this mediator between instinctual impulses that come from deep in the unconscious mind and the kind of the rules of society, right? The moral code that you have to uphold. And so the ego is always caught in between these two. I want to go run and kiss that girl, but I have to hold myself back, so I'll ask her to dance. There you go. Yeah. That was a good compromise for the ego. It's, like those cartoons with the little devil and the angel on the shoulder. In between was the ego trying to compromise between the two. Jung saw it differently, though. He said, because the ego is like the center of our awareness, the center of our conscious mind, it's more like the regulator, the center that holds everything in place and that gives you a sense of I. And also this, and I think maybe Freud and him agreed that it's really driven by survival, both physically and socially. Oh, absolutely. The primary functions of ego from the Jungian perspective are to make sure you survive physically and then make sure you fit in socially. Like very similar to Freud's idea of this superego, which is the moral code of society. We have to fit in, right? And you'll notice if you pay attention to your own mind, it's always checking to see how others are perceiving you, how others are seeing you, what they're thinking about you. That's ego function right there. Now, there's nothing wrong with it. That we need that, right? It's a good resource to have. Jung would say that the only problem is that we start to identify with that sense of self as ego. Like the small self. Yeah. Yeah, and it just becomes the I, me, mine part of our psyche that runs the whole show. And it is very limiting in that regard. And so when we talk about the ego, why we need it, it actually started early in life. We have this sense of like that we're separate from other people. Like, I don't know what age or stage in childhood the baby realizes that they're separate from the mother, that they're not one unit, like they were in the womb. Do you know the age that they... Well, I mean, there's some thoughts on this, but a year and a half, you start to see children kind of wander away from the mother and explore the world. And want to do their own thing. Yeah. And so, so it gives us a sense of individuality, which is different from individuation. We'll talk about that. Individuality, meaning I'm my own person. I am separate from the world. And then we have to learn how to navigate this world that's me and them and out there, and how do we survive, not only physically, like what is safe to be around, who is safe to be around, but then also when we go to school and learn how to socialize with other people, how do you act and who am I? And then how am I defined? Like,
when I was growing up, I was the smart one. So I was always the nerdy girl, like I got that label because smart equals nerdy. And then it became my identity. Like I couldn't see myself out of it. And so then the ego creates all these strategies based on that conditioning of that early life to function in the world. And then we think we are our patterns. Our patterns are who we are.
Yeah.
And that's and even things that happen to us are who we are. Like if we had a trauma or we had a tough divorce in our family and we had to move and we think, oh, I'm this damaged little child still. That's what the ego tries to carry on, that story. And that's where it can be limiting.
Well, and it does it for a good reason, because if we think from evolutionary psychology, it's like this: if you don't have an ego, a good strong ego, you're not going to survive, essentially. First of all, you have to look out for yourself, for number one, right? And if you don't do that, the tiger's going to eat you pretty quickly, and so the story is over.
So the protective mechanism does serve us.
It serves us tremendously. But again, we're not meant to stay there, according to Jung and to other spiritual traditions, right? It's not the place where we need to dwell. And a lot of us, of course, get stuck there because we don't see any other options. We say, well, what else is there? All I can experience is myself and my desires and my family and the things that surround me.
And even my past history and all that narrative defines me. But, you said something earlier that I thought was so critical that I did not learn until I met you. And this concept of a strong ego. And that we do need a strong ego. I read a lot of the Eastern philosophy, and the ego's just not, just get rid of it. You're not the ego. And it's not as simple as that, because I've noticed that many people, like over the years, 20 years of us working with people, that there seems to be a prerequisite to do individuation or do shadow work is to have a strong ego. Yeah. And so I thought, let's talk about what that is so people can recognize it, and maybe the people around you. And I think when we talk about individuality, one of the hallmarks of a weak ego is someone who's just a chameleon. They just follow the crowd. They're just they don't have any individuality, and they're basically, their opinions are easily shifted based on the environment, and they're easily, like, they don't have that kind of a stubbornness in a way. They're kind of like flexible, like almost too flexible. Would you say that was one of the qualities?
Absolutely, but we don't want people to self-diagnose here, because it's essentially that we all have those qualities, right? It's more like a spectrum. In certain circumstances, right, if we're threatened by other individuals, we might feel that way. Even if we're powerful and strong and intelligent, we might feel like I don't belong and I don't have enough to contend with these people, right? They're more powerful than me or something like that.
But if it's consistent, where they feel kind of those lost individuals, and in leadership, I think one of the main problems I know I had to work on is building my ego around being a leader. And the concept of being a leader is that I would tend to want to please everyone on the team, and make sure everyone's happy. And then being a chameleon, and like almost sometimes hiring consultants and just following what they say, even though inside I know, this isn't right. So what you're saying is like a spectrum, is like sometimes we can fall into that pattern or that behavior of following other people. Even like I know in the coaching industry, there's all these like things you should do, and everyone's kind of following the same formula, and there's no individuality there. So I think that's what we're talking about here, not like a diagnosis where there's something wrong, but it's also to kind of be aware of that spectrum that's happening inside of us. Like, are we making our own decisions, or are we just following the crowd?
Yeah, I think of it very much like in the arts. You have to learn the rules first. If you're a writer, if you're an artist, a filmmaker, anything artistic or creative, or in business as well, you have to learn the rules first in order for you to break them, right? To let them go and be really creative. You need that first element. So that's the ego. We need to master our ego first and establish ourselves as a person, a persona, an individual, so that then we're able to transcend it.
Yeah, I know it's that, but that's what I was saying. You have to build the ego first before you can let it go. And if you're like a chameleon, it's really hard. What are you letting go of? Because it's so mushy and undefined. Like if you're have an undefined
Yeah.
ego that is like you like the whole idea of I don't know who I am kind of thing, where you just are led all the time. And I'm talking about the extreme, obviously. But if you find yourself with like, how can you transcend that you can't define?
Yeah, because boundaries, if you think about boundaries, they're so essential in human interaction. If you
Mm-hmm.
don't have proper boundaries, you can't really get along in society and work with other people
Would that be a
because,
sign of a strong ego? Someone who has good
yeah,
boundaries?
that if you're able to establish strong, clear boundaries for the limits of how
Mm.
people can interact with you and
Mm.
where the limits are, right? That's a good way to be because it helps people relax around you. They know who you are and how far they can take it with you.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're not clear on your boundaries and you don't know how to set proper boundaries, then people are anxious around you because they're not sure how to treat you and how to
Mm.
react to you or how to interact with you.
I was just thinking a good example is like if you work in a partnership with someone, say whether it's a spouse or someone else you're in partnership with, if one person is just going with the like you're the person that knows it all, I'm
Mhm.
just going by the side, just following you, and then there's resentment as to not getting what you want in that partnership, whether it's a relationship or a business relationship. Collaborations, a lot
Mhm.
of leaders do collaborative deals with people, and if you're unable to keep boundaries and know what you want, I think it's this idea that you know what you want and you're firm on that and you're certain on that versus, okay, I guess I'll just let them lead. You're letting other people
Mhm.
lead and you're not really leading in your own life. And that's why I really love this topic, because we don't want to just be this high level spiritual person as a leader without having a strong ego, because they go hand in hand.
Yes, I mean,
I mean,
we could disagree.
yeah,
Like,
okay. Well, I mean,
there are,
it's a stage you have to go
yeah,
through to get to the next level.
yeah, but let's talk about transcending the ego
Okay.
because I think that's where you're going, right? With
Yeah.
the idea of spirituality often centers around the idea of an individual being able to transcend their ego, to let go of uh, their persona and their social status, and many traditions have this idea of that you as you enter into a spiritual life, you become someone else. Essentially,
Mm.
you drop the old persona and
Mm-hmm.
the old ego, and now you become someone else,
Mm-hmm.
and something else is taking the place of that dynamic of the psyche where the ego is the center.
Mm-hmm.
Now this the divine element or something, the spiritual element is the center of your life.
Well, here's my counter to that, and this comes from Jung himself, and he said that we need to build that individual identity, like that ego identity, because it prepares us for us connecting with the divine on a soul level. And if we don't pass through this kind of developing our individual self as a human being, as an ego, that it's hard to then have a really powerful
Mm.
spiritual experience from the soul, because we're learning, okay, I have an individual experience and a universal experience as well. And that's what the ego, development of the ego early in life, really prepares us to do. Because if we're spiritual beings, and let's say there's this whole plan for us to be liberated from the ego, why would we get one in the first place? And it's that's what he said. It served that purpose to have us have a kind of a place to kind of put something personal to relate to something universal. And I don't know
Yeah.
if you,
Yeah, I mean that makes sense.
yeah,
But essentially, the what happens in spiritual work is that the ego then becomes subservient to this
yes,
higher purpose, the divine element in the
mm-hmm.
psyche, so that the ego is still there. It's not pushed. It's not destroyed or gotten rid of, as some people talk about getting rid of the ego. It's simply that it's put in the right context. That it's part of your human body,
It's more of a
your mind
passenger
body.
than a driver, right?
Yeah, it's your mind body, and your mind body needs it, right? If you're walking down the street and you see a big truck coming your way, it's going to help you get out of the way automatically without you thinking about it. It's a useful function, as well as the persona, right, or the presentation of the ego in the external social circumstances. If it's under the direction or under the service of the divine spiritual element, then it serves as that function. That it helps you uh, communicate your spiritual aspirations to the community in a viable way.
Mhm. And so the ego building gives us an initial sense of a self, and then we're prepared to step in a larger version of ourselves.
That's right.
And so, how does this play out in leadership and people that are entrepreneurs and they have teams or they're making collaborative decisions? I know for me, negotiating contracts and hiring consultants and trusting the advice I'm getting from mentors, and how do we balance that? Um, and does a strong ego come to play in that realm?
Yeah, and again, ideally, right? If a leader is really using higher principles
Mm-hmm.
to develop their work, then the ego is playing a role, but it's not the primary role.
Could you describe higher principles for people that don't know what that means?
Yeah, so the ordinary principles of business are fairly simple. You can find them anywhere in any business book. It will explain to you.
Revenue, cash flow, expenses,
supply and demand, and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Right? And those are good. I mean,
like
those
lower
are,
knowledge.
Yeah, those are the tools essentially of the trade. Mm-hmm. Like a surgeon essentially needing scalpels and scissors and all that stuff. The higher principles though are like the surgeon's understanding of her craft and the mastery of her mind and the skills in her hands that she's able to apply to perform with the tools.
Yes.
That incredible surgery that
like using her body, using her like past experience and the knowledge that she gained.
And those are principles of anatomy, physiology, medicine, of course, all this incredible higher knowledge that is in medicine. The same principles in business. What are the higher principles in business? This ability to understand that you're helping the world, that there are ways
it's like a purpose, even.
Yeah, a purpose and a way to use money as a tool, not as an end in itself.
Like money to build your ego. I'm sure many people have seen Instagram videos of people with their jets and their rented houses to appear they have all this money, and it's like, and then there's a lot of people that are just mesmerized by that. They want to kind of be successful, and again, there's nothing wrong with that. You can do that, but if that's the end, where are you going to take that when you go? Like, what is that about? And that actually creates a lot of suffering if your identity or your ego is defined by those things. And so you're saying the higher principle is seeing more of a higher purpose to what you're doing versus just looking at the bottom line. And, I would say that corporate people, a lot of corporations, there's no like higher wise intelligence running it. It's very mechanic, machine driven. Yeah, like a machine industrial. And so it's all about like spitting people out and charting, getting the best out of most of the employees and firing people without realizing like they have personal lives and their struggles, and they're trying to, support their family, and they just lay off people. It kind of has that unconscious like disregard for, the heart and the soul of the people, and then even what they're selling type of thing. And then as entrepreneurs, especially small business entrepreneurs, we are different. We actually started because we wanted to make a difference. Most of us, we didn't want to do this to get rich. So we're already on a higher plane. It's just that sometimes we can get caught up in it, especially when you start making a lot of money. You can start getting caught up in it. Yeah. And so it's a practice, a spiritual practice, to remember why you're doing it in the first place.
Yeah, so the higher principles serve as that invisible element that you're following and studying instead of going from, some say, the evidence of the senses, just observing what's the bottom line and how many widgets are you selling and all that stuff. Again, it's important to keep your eye on those things, but the higher principles give you a sense of why you're doing this. It's your why, it's your purpose, like you say, your higher purpose.
Yeah, instead of thinking of, I know one of early in my career, one of the coaches, we had an event and she said, "How many buying units did you have in the room?" I'm like, "Buying units? That sounds so cold." Like, and I was like, "No, there's souls that need to be, that want to be transformed," like not thinking of it as such a transactional, and as business owners, we do need to balance that. We can't go into like, I just want to save the world and not charge any money and not make any money and, live off, my mother still or whatever, what, I don't know how people make money. If they're not making money, how they sustain themselves, but how important it is that, to make that financial uh, stability, have that financial
Mm-hmm.
stability, and be able to create more from a place of giving, of changing the world, of something higher than themselves.
Yeah, and we'll be talking more about that in the series,
Yeah.
about these higher principles. But the ego, the question was, do leaders need a strong ego?
Mm.
Um, and it's yes and no, right? If we see it from the perspective of the ego has its role, yes, then there's nothing wrong with having a strong ego because it's going to help you do your work. But
Hmm.
it shouldn't be the primary driver, because the ego would be the one that would be interested in augmenting itself through wealth and through
Mm.
money and through
And
status.
identifying that, and then the downside of that is it's all great when things are going great, but when you have a setback, when trouble, someone quits, a key team member quits, people are it can get really hard, and then your identity is tied to that business, as your business is you. And especially entrepreneurs, because it's
Mm.
usually very personal, that we are so like close to our company and what we do. And then we become, it's an extension of ourselves, which is, in a way, it could be in a spiritual sense, but if we make it a survival, if my business is down, then I'm down. If my business is up, then I'm up. I'm successful, I'm a failure, I'm success. It's just exhausting. And I think a lot of people overwork because they're still chasing that carrot of self-acceptance, acknowledgement, love from early in life through their business. And that is what causes a lot of stress.
Yeah,
And
that's
that's when the ego's really running your decisions,
yeah,
and you feel that you can't stop, you can't relax, because the money's going to stop coming in if you just take a day off.
that's right. And that's when the ego is really in control,
Hmm.
and you see the side effect of frustration, burnout that
Yeah.
people talk about, because it is exhausting to uphold the ego all the time, and to feed it. It will never be satisfied. It's never enough, and therefore you're always on this treadmill.
Mm. And I think that we always say that it's not black and white. That's the thing about Jung's work. It's not just a quick kind of concept of, okay, no ego, or I'm either my true self or the ego. It's not so broken down in such a
Mm.
defined role. It's like you said, a spectrum. And so there's parts of your life where you do have a strong ego, where you are, maybe you have a strong ego in your business, but your relationships, you are like a puddle with your partner, and you just feel like you've lost all your power. I've seen this so many times working with entrepreneurs. They have a strong confidence in one area of their life, and in another area of life they don't. Or you see those men that are like all powerful at work, and then they go home to their wife, and the wife's like, nah, 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 like yelling at them, and they're like, okay, dear, and they're not that same person at home. And so we there's always places for us to improve upon, and see where we're kind of not standing in our individuality. But also, it's a balance of the strong ego and our true self, like not allowing just watching it, watch it. You're like, yes, it's important, but you don't want to over rely on the ego, or you're going to end up stressed
Mm-hmm.
out and burnt out, like we said.
Yes, but also the other side of the coin, that in combination and in balance, this is a powerful combination
Yes.
where you have higher principles directing the ego to do its work in a proper way. Then you have these successful companies and entrepreneurs that really change the world and change the game of their industry.
You could look at your bank account and say there's $1 million in the bank account, and the ego will say, look how great I am, look how much I accomplished. And then that's a slippery slope if that money goes away. But if you're looking at that $1 million as from a higher purpose, you would say, wow, I have more resources to reach more people. Look how many people I've helped. I'm a success in helping transformations, or I'm a success in helping bring my product out to the world that has affected so many people, improved so many lives. We want to have some kind of meaning behind what we do and the reason for it, versus just, I want to have this number or this title, millionaire, after my on my Instagram account, multimillionaire, or whatever people do now. And so that's really the balance. So the money and the success serves the higher purpose, not the other way around.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so let's wrap it up. So we define that the ego is something that Freud and Jung had a slight disagreement on. And Jung saw the ego as a necessary part of our development. But at midlife, we want to individuate from it. We also talked about how the leader, people that don't have strong egos can be more like chameleons and out of their power, and the need to build it up a little bit so you can be an effective leader. And then the last part, we talked about how we need to balance it out. Like we need the higher purpose. We need, what did you say, the higher knowledge, the higher principles. If we're just operating from ego, we will suffer as a business owner. We will suffer as a leader because we cannot ever be happy just living from ego.
That's a good way.
Anything I missed?
Yep. No, that's it.
All right. So think about your life. Think about something in your life that you feel like you don't have a strong enough ego in, and how can you create boundaries, or how can you redefine who you are, and maybe start thinking about who am I in this marriage? Who am I in this relationship? Who am I in this friendship, in this family? And you start to, really think about that. But also if it's in leadership and running a company, who am I? Like I want to really know who I am and what is acceptable to me, what's not acceptable, what decisions I want to make. But then the last part is really trying to absorb the higher knowledge. And what would be a good first book for someone to read who's never read Eastern philosophy? What do you think?
The Bhagavad Gita.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too. Yeah, the Bhagavad Gita. There's a great translation by Eshwaran. I'm really botching his name, but we'll put the book in the show notes. But it's a really great beginner's guide to Eastern philosophy, non-attachment, and really understanding life beyond the ego and serving your company, their employees, your team members, your people, everyone you interact with, your clients and customers, with that higher purpose. And they will feel it. And it actually will help you become more abundant and more successful. So we will see you next week on our next episode. Thank you for joining us and have a wonderful day.
See you next time.